This might be very short. I had little time to do any preparation. And Shar doesn't believe it. I wouldn't be surprised if it only lasted an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. Oh, you have a Mike Reiko book. I like him a lot. Well, we have finally come to the end of the Tempest, and we've also come to the end of the talks on magic. And all that is left is a little bit to talk about magic itself, because that is our theme. Magic, black and white. We looked at Macbeth first and looked a little bit at black magic, as much as one dare do that, because some things get stronger if you start paying attention to them. And they feed on the negativity. In the Second World War, Hitler knew about this, and he said, "Send me your hate." He wanted people to send him telegrams of hate because he knew he could use that and turn it against people. The Tempest was for white magic and quite a few other things. Now, when we speak about black magic, it's unfortunate that it has come to be called that, because there are many beautiful things, including people, which happen to be very dear to me, that are called black. I'm not sure that I understand completely where the usage comes from. Some clairvoyants describe that when a person is hateful, that they emanate something like a blackness into their aura. And I think quite a few things have come into our language from clairvoyance. Probably two of the most famous are the French statement "sacré le bleu," which means a sacred blue light. And that probably is, they describe it when something comes as a bolt out of the blue. Not meaning the blue sky, but that there is a lightning bolt of sacred consciousness in one's sacredness in one's consciousness, and that shows up in the aura. The other one that's common is calling someone yellow, because yellow is the color of Venus. And Venus is not one to be fighting, and will always try to finesse or make peace or do something like that. Now, it is true that hatred is one of the strongest motive forces that is behind deeds of black magic. But it's also likely that the black comes from things in this world. One of my favorite poets talks about the unanimous night. In this sense, he's speaking about darkness. He's using it as a metaphor for ignorance. That in the dark, all of us are equally disadvantaged. We have it in our common parlance. We talk about black ignorance, which is a very apt description. It's hard to tell whether both of these usages of black, one from clairvoyance and one from sensory experience in this world, have a common source, some universal idea, a Platonic idea, which the Jungians would call an archetype. Mystical astrologers would say, yes, this is true. And they would point to the fact that Saturn indicates ignorance and darkness and selfishness and all of those things put together. The Macbeths seem to be ignorant of magic. They were selfish for power, and when it was offered to them, they would take it. They weren't really black magicians. So one can be dark or malevolent without being a black magic. They may be sorcerers in the making, because very often, out of the desire for power or the desire for love or something like that, people get recruited into black magic. They have several wishes granted, and as part of the bargain, they enter into a path of selfishness and get pretty far down the garden path before they know how far they have strayed. But then they're bound, and it's difficult when one gets in that kind of a strait. The weird sisters in Macbeth are a different story. On one hand, they seem to be representations of the fates. The Urd sisters, Ud, Skuld, and Verdande. And in a way, Macbeth has a very fated way about it. Things happen whether the sisters impel them or not. Sometimes usually they just display what is coming into being. Poor Macbeth, he feels, just thinking of him, he seems fated. No matter what he does, fate seems to have its way with him. He's a hapless chap who is caught in things, and they just happen, and he struggles, but the more he struggles, the more he becomes a minion of fate. And that's the way it is when you're ignorant and selfish. You can't see many options. You're in the dark. You can only see what you want, and that leads you to certain inevitable results. Most often, we're ignorant of the consequences, especially the bigger and deeper consequences of our deeds. In our ignorance, we think we can get away with things. We assume that destiny and its agents are in the dark, as much in the dark as we are. And we think that there's something outside of us and not actually part of our being. When we're ignorant, we can't see anything but our own way. It is a step forward in evolution when we have options, or when we can see there are other options and we're not blinded by selfishness. On the other hand, when we look at the weird sisters, they do appear to be black magicians. They don't have much trouble at all misleading and urging Macbeth into nefarious ways by visions and signs and wonders. They seem to be knowledgeable about magic, but they know enough, or they know better, than to outright thwart divinity. They're not challenging God directly, at least not yet. In our vanity, I suppose that comes at a later state. They're far enough along that they don't even have to do a lot of things. They have minions like Macbeth carrying out their nastiness. And they use the energies of others and not their own. They stir up mischief, and they do it intentionally. They stir up bigger trouble if they can. However, their motivations are dark also, and they act in the dark. It almost seems like purposeless what they're doing with Macbeth. It's like some kind of prank. One could even say that the weird sisters are being used as some very elaborate way to show that there is no magic. Because all the things that happened to Macbeth in his life would happen even if there were no magic. He oversteps his power and he overruns other people. You could almost think that the presence of the weird sisters was there to disprove magic, except for the fact that there are a few magical phenomena. And they're more than just suggestions. They're actually visions. But in any case, the weird sisters seem almost as purposeless as Macbeth. Ignorance. The source of the word white in white magic seems to be something like an inverse parallel of the source of black in black magic. There are a few cases to the contrary. The one that comes to mind most is in Moby Dick, when Melville describes the kind of whiteness that is evil, and then describes it in terms of the whale itself. He talks about a pale, ugly kind of whiteness. I can't even put words to it, because what he says is so beautiful. I almost brought it in to read. I figured, well, I'm not short on material tonight, and maybe I'll read instead of give a talk. But for the most part, white is associated with purity and goodness. Clairvoyants do claim that there is more light or brightness in the auras of people who are beneficent or who are doing good things. People who are giving and big-spirited. One doesn't even have to be a clairvoyant to see that a lot of people are clearer. They're easy to look at. There's nothing between you and them. When we see the truth, there is an experience of inner light. And just as with blackness, there is something in sensory experience. We see things clearly in the light of day, the full light of day. When we have that light, we can choose our options, which we can't do in the dark. The thing is, in The Tempest, all of the characters, including Caliban, eventually see the light, and they improve. By the end of the play, everybody has improved. Antonio maybe not so much, but most everybody. Prospero, the white magician, has enough freedom and enough spiritual creativity so that he can pull the whole thing off. Everything from the Tempest to all of the actions he effects on everyone on the ship. All of the characters grow, and they grow for the better. And they agree so by their own estimation. The thing is outside of a few scratches and cramps and being stunk up a bit, nobody really gets hurt in The Tempest. This is really the indication of white magic, that Prospero can accomplish everything, that everyone can be improved, and there is no harm to everyone. That certainly points to the unity and positivity of the spirit. Everyone gets better and no one really gets harmed. There is, in The Tempest, a fulfillment of destiny, not the intimation of bad things to come. As one gets it, the sense you have sort of a sick feeling at the end of Macbeth. Yes, the good guys triumph, but you feel terrible that so many people had to go down in such ugly ways. It's a really, really dark play. There is a satisfaction in The Tempest, satisfaction of purposefulness, or that destiny points to something and not just to bring scoundrels to their justice. And also in The Tempest, there is a lot of love and a lot of forgiveness. Even the goddesses, the divinities, they condone and they participate in fulfilling the ends of love. They give a tip of the hat to it. So we can see in the same way that black magic is everyone for themselves, white magic has a sense of cooperation. It has a sense of everyone being improved. And everything is for some divine intent. It is, in the modern language, a win-win or everyone wins kind of situation. Now, before we try to further distinguish white magic from black, we need to distinguish magic itself, what it is. The word magic is one of those trash can words that is often misused and much misunderstood. It is something like the word mystery. For example, in the Roman Catholic Church, the term mystery means something that is to be revered but never understood. It is to be revered so much that one is awestruck by the mysteries, the incomprehensible mysteries. So awestruck that people don't question the mysteries. In fact, they're often instructed not to do so. And mysteries are sort of like furniture in up-and-coming middle-class pretentious people. They have a living room full of furniture that nobody ever sits on. It's kept covered until company comes, and then it looks just like it was delivered from the furniture store. The company sits on it, and as soon as they're out of the door, nobody's allowed in the room again, and the covers go back on. And sure, we've all seen that kind of thing. Magic is probably even a more misunderstood and misused term. Sometimes anything that occurs that isn't understood is called magic. In other words, magic would be a catchword for something we don't know or something that we're ignorant of. In our modern times, with all of the technical whiz-bang that there is, magic is anything that works really well and that it has some extraordinary features about it. You say, wow, that's magic. And to some, magic means prestidigitation, sleight of hand, enticing illusions that often involve very elaborate technical apparatus. To still others, magic means superstition. There is no such thing as magic, and magic is the word that catches all the superstition. To yet others, magic is some mysterious force and or knowledge by which nature can be overcome. Something unnatural and or something supernatural. That definition is closer to the way we're using the term. However, we would not consider it mysterious, except in the eyes of the ignorant. Someone who is enlightened and conversant with the finer forms of matter and the finer principles and laws within those finer forms of matter, and who is capable of directing them. Magic is just as natural as nature is. However, the magician who utilizes and directs those forces through the laws is not beyond, is not unnatural or outside of nature, but actually right inside of it. It's directed from within. Magic is the science and art of controlling and directing nature from within full consciousness. Actually, the workings of nature are magic, because there are spiritual beings within it that are doing the magic. In order for magic to take place in this manner, the same principles and forces that are in nature or what are being manipulated by the magician must be within the magician. We can't deal with something if we don't have it in ourselves. Unless we're part of the same reality, we can't deal with it. And the magician has to really know these features well, more within than without. Because if we can control those forces within ourselves, it's no big extension to control them outside. By this kind of understanding, Macbeth is obviously not a magician, black or white. He's pretty much unaware of the finer forces of nature. And when he does encounter them, he's terrified by them. Even when he's being hypnotically manipulated to commit a murder, he's terrified by the whole thing. When he's on his own, he doesn't use magic. He uses the most crude methods, murders, with hooligans to do the murders. He's such a crude man and he's so insecure, he couldn't control nature if he wanted to. To him, everything, magic, nature, it's all external to him. It's all out of his reach. He can't do anything about it. By this same understanding, the Weird Sisters probably are not magicians either. They're aware of the finer forces of nature and how they function, but nowhere in the play do we see them actually wield the forces of nature. They seem to be sensitive. We don't know whether voluntarily or involuntarily, of the forces that are coming into being. They have images of things that are about to happen before they happen. But they're not the causal agents of these things. They don't change anything. Seems like all they're capable of doing is making mischief by misguiding people, like Macbeth with a little bit of foreknowledge that they do have. So they're more misrepresentation than they are magic. They do have, in the cauldron scene, they do have the ability to conjure up visions, but when they do so, it's somewhat indirect. They don't do it by any power of their own. They do it by releasing animistic forces that are in dead objects. They don't use anything live at all. They have to use dead animals to release or to focus certain kinds of agencies into the world in order to use them. There are all kinds of schools of magic that do that. There's a lot of nature magic around. That's not really thaumaturgy. That's not magic in the high sense, where one gets within and actually changes things. A true magician can utilize nature forces, and sometimes does. But usually, the true magician draws on what is within, even if it has to be done by unctuous emotional excitement, as some kind of motive force to direct things. So though neither the Macbeth nor the Weird Sisters appear to be really proficient magicians, they still are evil. still have black intent. This is so because neither seems to serve the purpose behind nature. Macbeth is completely preoccupied with his selfish ends. And they're all things of the world. He's also occupied with alleviating his own insecurity. So much so that he doesn't even think much at all when his wife dies or when she commits suicide. He's willing to do anything in his power to reach his ends or to alleviate his insecurities. He doesn't have many things in his power, so he does all these crude things. When he does try to change destiny, all he does is gets himself more into it. It's almost like a fish on a hook, that the more that it pulls, that the more it sets the hook into itself. He's not really trying to rebel against destiny. He's just selfish. The Weird Sisters do not appear to be directly at enmity with divinity, as a deeper and truer black magician would be. It would be vaingloriousness and of seeing self as an equal to God. There would be envy. However, they don't benefit anyone. They're contrary, and it's almost petty, the things that they do. They're malicious, spiteful. They like to see death and destruction. They like that energy that's released in death and destruction because they can't generate or create or bring new life. That brings out a very interesting point about black magic. You can't diagnose it. And you really can't give reason to it. You can't really explain it. You can follow its development, its etiology, psychologically. You can say this happens to a person and they react this way and this way and this way. There's a causal train inside of the psyche of the black magician that leads them down the path. That's not really an explanation. One can see through all of the intricate and elaborate schemes, the psychological machinations that they go through to accomplish what they want to go through. But nevertheless, it's all stupid. Maybe I will make this a little longer, tell a story on myself. It's a shameful story that I've told before. But there was a time, some years ago, that I was reading through the Isthmus. And I just happened to stumble on the want ads. And in the want ads, there was a want ad that got my attention. It went something to the effect of proportionately Rubenesque woman seeks personal trainer with a firm hand. And I glommed onto that. And it shook me because it's so unlike anything that I am. I try not to hurt anyone or anything. And I tortured myself with the whole business for a while. And eventually, about myself, I came to the conclusion that there is a difference between being loving and kind and gentle and being weak and sickly. That some acts of love and kindness have a firmness about them. Not necessarily a hardness or a destructiveness, but a firmness about them. And I think it was sort of like a wake-up call to me that if I didn't do something about this pusillanimous part of my character, I would probably go to the other extreme. I would probably, it told me that there was something within me that wanted me to be strong and dominant. And so that, when I got that message, things began to be clear to me. The other part of the clarity came was when I thought to myself, if someone wants to be spanked when they do something wrong, but they enjoy being spanked, where's the correction? You know what I mean? It's self-contradictory. Obviously, people will intentionally do things wrong to satisfy their pleasure in a backward sort of way. And what they were intending through discipline was an impossible thing, because all they were doing was producing a situation that was an incurable kind of wrong. And when I once discovered that, I discovered the nature of all black magic. There are no good reasons. There may be psychological conditions that give one more opportunities to go down that path, but there are no good reasons at all for black magic. They're all stupid. And the more that you try to make something of them, the more you get like Macbeth. You get yourself more hooked, and you're more into the stupidity of it. Ultimately, one cannot separate oneself from everything. One cannot stand against the one with a capital O. It's spiritually suicidal. In terms of insight, or in terms of intuitive knowing, I guess everything can be broken down to yeas or nays. Whether you're true to yourself or whether you're true to what you're in that very simple way. By the understanding of magic as we're looking at it, Prospero is surely a magician. He understands the forces of nature, and it's shown that he has taken some time, he's taken some trouble to learn about those things. He sacrificed everything in life to learn about those things. And he directs them by something within himself. Not manipulating for things outside of himself like the Weird Sisters. And he's far enough along that he doesn't have to do it all by himself. He can delegate. And his delegations in this play are to Ariel. Ariel represents all of the forces of nature that are directed by Prospero. Whatever he does for the good of all. Never for spite, never for whim, never for petty end. It probably, looking at it in the larger sense, nothing is done for his good. Even his repatriation isn't just going back to Milan and being the Duke. The repatriation that is being implied here seems to be that he's talking about his redemption or his salvation, not just a mere dukedom. It's an interesting thing that in all of these magical things that he does, he's masterful. And he's confident of himself, but not in such a way that he doesn't have some humility. When he speaks about his plans for the Tempest, as he does several times, he does it in the realization that there is something higher and greater than himself, and that his plans may not work out, even though he may be at the top of his powers. They might not work out because there may be some higher end. He is at peace and content with himself in a kind of cosmic uncertainty or in unsurety. So he's definitely a magician. He's a high magician. He doesn't need to rely on chance. He doesn't have to destroy any animals to do it. His word is enough. Probably what is a more interesting question is whether Prospero is a white magician. The answer to that depends on what you mean by white magician. By the definition of white magician that we've been using, which is kind of a lax one, and kind of a general one, we're saying that it's someone who uses the finer forces and principles of nature to serve the higher purpose behind nature. By that definition, he certainly is a white magician. He edifies everyone, lets everyone have their dignity, and they all sense a greater purpose. He has the power, he has the wisdom, he has humility, and he has the deeds. In that sense, he's a white magician. But there are a lot of other definitions of white magic. At the time of Shakespeare, there were a couple of definitions of white magic that were around that are a little bit more strict. And by those stricter definitions, at least the strictest one, Prospero is only on the edge of becoming a white magician. In the late 13th century, there were two figures that dabbled with magic. More than dabbled. One of them was a man named Raymond Lull. He was a noble, but he lost a lot of his fortune, or the family lost a lot of the fortune. But nonetheless, he was a courtier. And he was, by his own definition, a very dissolute man. And he fell in love with a woman at court. And he was obsessed with her beauty. And he was obsessed with her body. And one day, she, knowing this, bared her breast, literally, bared her breast to him. And it was cancerous. And the shock of seeing the canker of the flesh, as the Bible calls it, eating away at something that he thought was so beautiful, caused him to rethink his worldly and ephemeral values. And so he threw himself into spiritual things. He studied alchemy, and somewhere along the way he had about 3 or 4 visions of Christ Jesus on the cross. And he became something of a Christian fanatic. There are stories, I don't know how true they are, of him changing base metals to gold in the castles and towers of England and using them to fund crusades. And he had something of a obsession with Muslims. And he wanted to convert them all to Christianity. And on 3 occasions he went across the Mediterranean Sea to do so. And finally, I think he was stoned on each of the 3 occasions. I'm in the final one, he was stoned so badly that he was killed. And he was a martyr, which probably didn't go against his temperament because he was of that nature. His conception of white magic was the service of Christ Jesus and nothing else. And so in that sense, when one gave one's own life in one's deeds and one's vital living, that was white magic. There was another alchemist who lived just a little bit younger than him, maybe about 10 or 15 years younger. His name was Roger Bacon. He was a scholar, an Oxford-educated scholar. Then he became fascinated with theology. Wrote huge multi-volume works on theology. Then he became interested in science. And then he became interested in alchemy. And when he was an alchemist, he produced the electrum magicum. It is something where you take all of the metals, you fuse them together. Jerry and I tried to do it, or Jerry did the work. Found out that the technique is not a simple matter. It has to be done at under certain astrological conditions. And he made 2 mirrors. One of the mirrors was such that when you looked in it, you could see anything you wanted to see out of history. And the other mirror was contemporaneous. You looked into that mirror, and you could see anything that was going on at the very moment anywhere in the world. And he had an apprentice. And the apprentice looked into the mirror and saw that the very instant that he was looking into the mirror, that he saw his parents burned to death in the family home. There was a fire and they were burned to death. And this so utterly shocked Roger Bacon that he gave up this kind of alchemical magic, and he became or worked toward becoming a white magician. And his definition of a white magician was about as strict as you can get. His definition of a white magician was one who continuously lent one's consciousness to worshiping and adoring and contemplating divinity, the universal spirit. And so he had himself bricked up into a cell in which there was a small opening in the bottom, and food went in and excrement went out, and all the rest of his days he dedicated to trying to become a white magician, have his attention as continuously as possible on the divine. Now that's a pretty strict definition. In that sense of white magic, it means white magic in the sense of white light. Like the white light we're looking through right now contains all of the colors in it. It can be broken down into those colors. In this sense, white magic is the return to unity from all of the colored separation that we live in. One is seeking the ultimate whiteness, the meaning, the purpose behind everything. This is probably why Prospero breaks his wand, and why he sinks his book, and why he abjures what he calls rough magic. He no longer needs to be some kind of hierarchical force with others like Ariel under him. He frees Ariel, and he frees all of the others. He forgives their sins against him. And by that same token, he is freed himself. Perfect statement, very practical. As long as we don't want anybody else to be free, we want to be sure that they carry it all out to the last jot and tittle. As long as we feel that way, we cannot be free ourselves. So he is on the edge of transcending. He is even going to transcend being a nature force. He's transcending to realms of pure spirit. In that kind of transcendence, there is a responsibility. It no longer means that he is carrying out the intent of higher purpose. He's now a living, conscious part of that higher intent. This means that he's coming into his own in his creative being. Everything he does is created, and is created in creativity. There are different stages of creativity. In our arts, the first thing we do is learn about the materials, and we develop skills, and we imitate. Eventually, we get to see things not only as they are, but we get to see them in a different way, and to present them in a different way, and we modify them. Eventually, we become more creatively free. We become free-form creators. We're free in any kind of expression. Eventually, we become spontaneous, that we can create anew at any given moment. Finally, we get to the point where Prospero is approaching, and that is the ability to create the opportunities for creation. To create the opportunities for freedom. That's basically what he's doing. He's giving everybody a chance to be free. He has forgiven them, but he's creating opportunities. He's ready to become part of the creation in the highest sense. White magic is creation. It isn't just a manipulation of nature, it's creation. Something divine is added, something new is added in the action. This is where I was trying to get at when we left off last time in a big hurry. I shouldn't have done it, but it gives me a chance to come back to it now, and that is at the epilogue, because the epilogue indicates all of that. Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true, I must be here confined by you, or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardon the deceiver, dwell on this bare island by your spell. But release me from my bands, with the help of your good hands, gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself, and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free. In all forms of mysticism, the problem of self has to be one of the greatest obstacles to liberation. When the word self is used, the pseudo-self or the false ego, though it is a problem in its own regard, is not what is meant. What is meant is the higher self, our individual spiritual being. That self, when we are talking to ourselves in the highest sense, that self is an idea. It is not an idea that can generate itself. It is the divine, immaculate conception. It is a conception within the universal spirit, by the universal spirit. We can strengthen this idea, and in doing so we often have the illusion that we create ourselves. Our selfhood and the truth in it, the spiritual truth in it, seems so self-evident that we think we conceived it rather than reconceived it. It seems that we must have created it. This self is a focus of universal spirit. It is a means for spirit to precipitate and participate in its creations and to become aware of its own being and of its own non-being in the things that it brings out from itself that are unknown. From our vantage point, the self is our identity. There is an image for the self that is given by the Bible, is given by the Greek sophists. I'm sure that the old-timers in India probably had it also. The image for self, we've mentioned it before, is a whirlpool, or an eddy, or a vortex in the sea of universal spirit. It's that in many religions. It is just like if you watch a stream and you see eddies in a stream, it seems like the more material realms condense and collect in the heart of this eddy. Supposedly each of the planetary spirits that are the spirits of our Sun, Venus, Mercury, and such are actually eddies within the etheric ocean. And in these eddies, the dense matter is condensed and it collects. And it is the concentration of the planetary spirit that is the force that produces the eddy, and that is the source of gravitation. Now there's always a danger of illusion when you make these kinds of images that are pointing things that are beyond images, things that are even beyond ideas. The danger is that we think the reality is exactly as we picture it, even though what we are trying to get at is much more abstract than that. Images like this might be helpful when they parallel the higher reality, or when they're born from the higher reality. But it is the opposite when the image is taken for the meaning itself. We must always keep in our consciousness that what we are examining here is the selfness of spirit, the beingness of spirit that is focusing its attention so as to objectify as a being. Now, if we turn inward and hold our attention and concentrate our attention on the essence of our existence, know thyself, what really happens is it is as though the whole universe is spinning around us, while we ourselves are calm and peaceful, just as though we were in the eye of a hurricane. It seems like we're in the heart of a vortex, such as we see without. There is another danger about using this kind of image, and that is trying to counter the tendency of thinking that the image is the reality by becoming so abstract that one can say nothing or know nothing because you can't get abstract enough. But using this image can be seen from two different vantages. The vantage of self as we experience it is from within the vortex, from within ourselves. We see everything from our point of view. It's the source of our understanding, but it's also the source of our arguments. Because from our point of view, we don't realize that the same reality someone else is seeing from their point of view. In this sense, we are the eyes, E-Y-E-S, and the eyes of spirit. Our self-image, our individual being, is in this form. And in this sense, it's sort of imaginary. Our individuation, or our strength of being, our definition, is like the definition of the vortex, which is determined how fast it spins and such like that. And that definition of our strength of being, our self-definition, depends on the will to be and the will to love, with a capital L. That is, it depends on how much we draw on the will and intent of the universal spirit, and how well and how much the universal spirit expresses its intents through us. This compound, cooperative expression is extremely important. The other vantage of the vortex is from the universal spirit. From that vantage, the vortex, the idea of self, is a partial vacuum. It's a nothing. It's an emptiness within the fullness of universal spirit. It's always hollow in the middle of a vortex. However, that seeming emptiness is extremely important, for it is through that emptiness that the universal spirit expresses, that it gives itself, that it finds the unknown consciousness within it. It is extremely important, the vortex, the self, but it is not self-important. Self-importance always mars the definition of the vortex, or always puts a false, weakening shield around it. This is so even when the vortex is the central vortex of the whole universal spirit, which we call God. That central vortex as God defines the motion within the life of the universal spirit, but it is not and cannot be self-important. By this sense, God is also an idea. The problem of self, getting beyond self-importance, getting beyond the relativity of one's point of view, is very difficult. It's almost impossible as long as one focuses all of one's attention on the vortex, on oneself. It's ironic, we're supposed to know ourselves, but if we focus all of our attention on ourselves, we can't get away. The vortex is obviously limited. The self is obviously limited. Otherwise there wouldn't be so many of us, right? There's a lot of illusion or illusoriness about it. And it is this problem of getting beyond self that is the problem of all mysticism. Some schools have tried to dissolve self. Obviously, that is a very difficult task, and it's somewhat paradoxical. And in the modern language, you would say that it is counterproductive. However, there are a number of people that are reasonable authorities that say it can be done. They say it is possible. However, if there is an obliteration of self, what purpose does it serve? It's not the vortex, it's not the self that produces the problems. It is the misuse or the misfocus of self that produces the problems. And it is the adventitious self-importance and self-centeredness that produces problems. The self really serves both the individual and the universal spirit. There's no self, there's no service to the universal spirit. Some schools try to master self, which only defines it much more strongly, and eventually turns out to be completely counterproductive and internally contradictory. The Christian approach, which is not exclusive to Christianity, has a different notion. It is a transcendence of self. But transcendence used in a slightly different way than we normally use it. Normally, the word transcendence means to rise above. But for the self, to rise above self is deeply paradoxical, to say the least. For a mystic Christian, in the jargon, it means to transfer the attention normally found and focused in self to the universal spirit. In our image, this is to transfer the perspective from the vortex to the ocean. Obviously, to do so is not a completely individual act, or it would just be more self-definition or more individuation, and the problem of self would not have been dealt with. It has to be in a cooperative act. Part of the act has to be accomplished beyond self. It means a surrender of self to selfness, a universal selfness, which one might say is the selfness of all selves. If this is done, if one transcends by changing the focus of attention from an individual point of view to the universal point of view, or surrendering the individual point of view to the universal, the self is still there. It's still capable and does function as a self. But the function is co-determined. It's ironic that the highest stages of magic, one again goes beyond being the determining force to being a co-determiner with the universal spirit, which is the senior partner. In Christianity, this is called, or this is accomplished by giving oneself to Christ. And again, that's not exclusive to Christianity. In this sense, Christ represents the self of selves that is defined by non-definition, the ocean that is unbounded. It is given this nomenclature because the being called Christ is a being that represents the life spirit. And the life spirit is the first plane of universal spirit. Sometimes it is called the realm of Christ consciousness. With this, one is not just focusing with another vantage, another self. One is seeing with and serving and part of the spirit that is all selves, and that is all selves simultaneously, or instantaneously, or eternally. This kind of act does not have to be some profound contemplative act. Even many very primitive Christians are practicing and preparing themselves for salvation, which means being redeemed from the little world of selfhood, by practicing the same thing. It's a fad. You even see bumper stickers that say WWJD. What would Jesus do? Of course, it's a little Jesus-centered, but the spirit is rightly taken. So, in the very last scene of the Tempest, Prospero says he will contemplate his death. Death to living for the self, but life in the ocean of life, or in the ocean of selfness. That's what he means and what he says in this epilogue when he says he's weak in his self. This is one of the meanings of that. He's foregoing that. He's recognizing how little strength that he has. In the epilogue, he says, and pardoned the deceiver. He talks about pardoning the deceiver, and earlier in this last scene, he forgives everyone. By the deceiver, he means not only his brother Antonio, the usurper, but himself. His self-deceiver. That's the problem of self. We're always deceiving ourselves by thinking this is it. Pardoning or forgiving is an unusual phenomenon. In the Bible stories, Gospels, which are formulae for initiation, Christ Jesus had really strenuous interactions with the Pharisees when he started forgiving sins. The Pharisees considered this blasphemous because they believed only God, that is, the universal Spirit, could forgive. And he was thereby proclaiming himself as God. What he was really doing was expressing his own nature. In the life spirit, everything is new. It's always perpetually new. It's rediscovered over again and again and again. And you can't even say again because it's always there. It's eternally new. Forgiveness, then, is an application of life spirit. That is a focus of attention or a distribution of attention of life spirit. Life spirit makes everything, when it functions as grace, it makes everything new. And it brings everything to creative life. It doesn't undo cause and consequence. It doesn't undo destiny. All that it does is it brings some new love and some new wisdom to a destiny situation. That's why it seems undiscriminating. It doesn't matter to life spirit whether one deserves forgiveness, because it's just the nature of everything new. It doesn't, deserves belongs to the law. When you're thinking in the law, then you think about whether a person deserves forgiveness. Being new, everything is creative. In the epilogue, with the help of your good hands, gentle breath of yours, my sails must fill, or else my project fails. Prospero says he needs the help of others to be free. Their hands, but most especially their gentle breath. He doesn't mean only the audience. He means all. He means the spirit of unity, of connectedness, of oneness, of all in the life spirit. The quality of equal love, of equal friendship. That's what supports the selves. It's the all-selfness. So this is a restatement of a surrender to something beyond self. And it is a true surrender, like the white magic of Roger Bacon. It's also in the spirit of St. Paul. What does it say here? Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is in despair, unless I be relieved by a prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. He's not praying for himself, or he's not praying to himself. The Spirit in that phrase is as if the Spirit prays itself into the, I don't know how to say it. Paul says that when one is deep in prayer, the Spirit is praying as much as the individual is praying. And the Spirit is praying into the individual as much as the individual is trying to reach into and penetrate into the Spirit itself. That is the perfect example of that unified completeness, that unified cooperation, that we give it everything we have to be in the Spirit, while simultaneously the Spirit is giving itself into it. And in that surrender, which is a very active surrender, it can't take place unless it comes from the Spirit rather than from the individual. A prayer prays itself. And when it prays itself, it does not mean vain repetition. Then he closes with a curious line where he says, "Let your indulgence set me free." At first, indulgence is not a good choice of words. It's not a good selection of words for somebody who had something like 250,000 word vocabulary. But if you think about it, maybe it is. When we indulge someone, the idea is that we give them more than they deserve, or we're flattering them, or we're flattering ourselves by flattering them. With indulgence of that kind, it's still within the law, and you and whoever receives your indulgence is in the same boat. You get just what you need. In grace, when one experiences grace, it always seems like it's more than we deserve, and like it's more than we can ever be worthy of. But that's the nature of the new. That is the ultimate giving, the ultimate sacrifice of the universal Spirit. It gives. It's indulgence, but not the kind of indulgence we think of. Freedom, and the freedom that comes from that is enough to speak for itself. So, we have looked a little bit at the Tempest in terms of white magic, and white magic in the sense of Roger Bacon. Next time, we will start having some fun. We won't have any major theme. We'll start working with Antony and Cleopatra, because it's just a happy play. Even though an empire crumbles and falls and is reborn in a stricter way, it's a very happy play, and it's got a lot of astrology in it. And I'm getting nowhere. I'm going to have to get on the phone tomorrow and struggle with Penguin Pelican about getting some books in so that we can all be reading on the same pages. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Before you all leave.
Oh, all right.
One of the reasons I was late. Well, probably in the car. Is I have the APT schedule.
I don't know, even if I'm going to have it this year.
But this is always going to be on Thursday night. They want me to work Thursday for weeknights, and I'm going to tell them there's Sunday night.
This is always going to be on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah. If I had the beginning, it would be on a Wednesday night.
Oh, it would be on Wednesday.
And that would meet every week. So. She says, ugh.
Pardon?
She says, ugh.
Got a question here in the beginning we talked about.
No, I just said
Let's see. Not the Tempest.
Macbeth?
Macbeth. And something about Saturn and ignorance and so on.
Yes.
The thought occurred to me, and I don't know if this was ever discussed in here or in any of the astrology classes, but the thought occurred to me. Is there a low side and a high side to Saturn just as there is with us?
Yes.
In other words,
Yes. Yes. Some cases, ignorance is absolutely necessary because we never specify anything without ignorance. It would be an effete spirit if everything stayed in the universal spirit and never specified.
why'd you put that word on me?
It would be one that has no creativity about it.
Oh, okay.
The astrology or the Shakespeare? I can get them. I won't get them right now, but I'll try to get them. I would like to see Anthony and Cleopatra, and I'm willing to go along with anything else of the others.
We have Anthony and Cleopatra and Mrs. Warren's Profession on September 21st.
Yes, that sounds very good to me.
Or October 5th.
Oh, yes. Running a little late there, though, aren't we?
Yeah.
I like Shaw, even though he's a little bit harsh sometimes, especially in his plays.